The legendary Dark Knight, Sparda, is probably the most, well, actually, no, yeah, he is, in my opinion, one of the most influential parts of the Devil May Cry series. Also the most mysterious and a bunch of other stuff that I'll get into, but he is kind of my favorite example of how lore should be done. Like, well, yeah, he is my favorite. Like, one of my favorite things about Devil May Cry is not just the gameplay, but it's also kind of the story and the lore. I like how Sparda is done. We never hear a whole lot about him, and it's gradually revealed more and more over time. But that's about it. And he is, in my opinion, one of the most influential characters in the story. Well, in the Devil May Cry series as a whole, because a lot of the events happened as a direct result of his actions. And yeah, he's just really an awesome character. I think he is just a lot of things that I'd like to get into. Well, not a whole lot, but there's some things about him I want to get into. And he is some of these things I think are what make him an awesome character in terms of lore. Sparda was basically a demon. He was a lieutenant of the king of demons, Mundus. Sparda was his lieutenant, his right hand man, the guy he probably trusted most. And when Mundus invaded the human world, or was going to, Sparda had a change of heart. He turned on humanity, turned on the demons, and locked them away. This included Mundus. And yeah, from then day on, Sparda acted like a guardian for the human world, and his actions would later bleed into legend until his eventual death. Before the story of Devil May Cry even started, like all the stories for Devil May Cry take place after his death, basically. Any information you learn about Sparda is after, or anything in the events where you have either read about or see or play in happens after he has passed. And he is sort of like a mythological character in some regards, because I think this was something the anime kind of illustrated for me. Was there's actually a statue in the city where Dante has his Devil May Cry shop at. There's actually a statue of Sparda, or I think it was a statue of Sparda. So he is a mythological figure or a folklore figure to humans. Like, they probably don't even know he was real, because what he did happened so long ago. And yeah, he is a person who was very influential. And this is something that I think makes him appealing to, at least to me, is he is a part of the lore. He is this lore figure that, well, he's a lore figure that I believe is done right. Another aspect of Sparda is the mystery. Again, he is a very heavy lore figure. We never see him in the games. And you are scarcely given information. Like, as the games go on, you learn more and more about him, like his actions, his adventures, like, and it's still scarce, the information you get on him. Like, I never get a feel for his personality. Basically, he was more or less a good person, or he eventually became one. And demons often make reference to him, like, oh, the traitorous Sparda, or the more flirtatious ones comment how Dante looks like him. Like Nevin said, how Sparda was a handsome devil and Dante was no slouch himself. So there's also that. And the mystery stays, kind of. You never get too much, which is something I like. I do think with lore today, we get too much. There's like a big exposition dump. Like, a lot of info is dropped on you, and it's kind of unnecessary. Like I say, like, leave an air of mystery to your lore, your figures and lores, depending on how you want to write them. This also depends on how you want to write them, but I think lore should be mysterious in a way to leave some to the imagination. But then again, that's just me. So Sparta was a very impactful person in life, and he is not the impetus or the catalyst for these events, but he is a big influence into the events that happened. So Devil May Cry 1, Mundus is trying to break out into the human world. Dante goes to stop him and to get revenge for the death of his mother and the corruption of his brother. Mundus wanted to use Lord Dante there, basically, and he wanted to kill him both to get out of into the human world and also to spite Sparda. Devil May Cry 2, there is a demon. I believe this was a portal that Sparda actually had a hand in closing years before when he was alive. Devil May Cry 3 is about Virgil, Dante's brother, trying to acquire Sparda's sword so he can gain his father's power. Sparda locked in the demon world, so Virgil has to activate the Timon Negru, I believe was what it was called, so he can get into the demon world. But unfortunately, in the process, he will be releasing the demons into the human world. So there's that downside. Devil May Cry 4, you have a cult that once served Sparda when he reigned as a feudal lord in Fortuna. And the gates, the hell gates that are around that area, he left them intact. Dante later destroyed them. Trish, I believe, suspects that Sparda didn't destroy them because he had an emotional attachment to them because they were probably the only way he could ever go home. I mean, he never went home, but he had that option still. And Devil May Cry 5, well, actually, he has less of an impact than that. Has more to. I mean, it's technically his son who caused the problem, but that's the yeah. But through the 4 games, he has an influence into the stories, not too much. Like he doesn't cause them directly. He has an indirect influence into stuff that happens in the story of the games, but that's it. I mean, that and the suffering his children go through are also technically because of him, because they're paying for his sins. But that's very brief, or not as long. So he has influence within the story, and he still has an air of mystery to him, which I like. I like how we never get too much of a feel for the guy, about who he was as a person. Was he complicated? Was he someone who was evil that turned good? We never get that. That's left to your own imagination. Unless I've been reading it wrong, in which case feel free to correct me. Lastly, there is Sparda's legacy. Now, he has a very much of an impact in the story, as well as a mystery element to him. But I think the most important thing is the legacy he left behind, his 2 sons, and his power, his weapons, and old grudges kind of were left behind. And this was something that was able to be used for stories. I mean, Dante continuously has to take the heat for his dad's old rivalries, or the enemies he made. Like Grendel, I believe was his name. No, not Grendel, Beowulf. He wanted to kill Dante just because he had the same odor as Sparda, because he was his son. In fact, both of his sons became, part of the reason they became the men they became was because of Sparda's enemies. They killed Sparda's wife, their mother. They burned down his house after he was gone, after he died. And his sons were basically left on their own, and they were separated from each other, thinking the other was dead. Dante more or less embraced his humanity, but resented his demonic heritage. Virgil resented his humanity, but embraced his demonic heritage. Being the contrast of one another, as I said in one of the previous videos I did on them. And I like to go back to the part where he has an impact on the stories of Dante's adventures and Virgil's adventures, in that he, more or less, the stuff that happens in the stories would not have been possible without Sparda, sort of. Devil May Cry 1, that would have never happened without him. 1 and 3 specifically would never have been possible had Sparda not betrayed Mundus. In fact, Earth would probably not exist as the humans in that story know it. They'd all either be dead or slaves to demons. And I like how, and also he has a legacy of how he's remembered. Like humanity remembers him as this mythical figure, if they are unaware he was a real person at all. Like, I'm going off of memory here, so forgive me if I get some stuff wrong lore-wise. But I kind of like when figures of lore have an impact in the story. Like, both Dante and Virgil were impacted just by the fact that they were the sons of that guy. The mere fact they were his sons meant they had to suffer for it, and they became very drastically different people from who they probably would have been had he lived longer. And yeah, like just bring all these points home. The mystery of who he was, leaving it up to interpretation. The impact he had within the story of it affecting his children and his enemies and the world around them was more or less shaped by his actions. I mean, not completely, but his actions did have an influence on the world they would one day inhabit. I like that. I like it when a lore figure has that kind of legacy and impact and influence on the story in the present. It's like when you look at stuff now from historical figures, like their actions and how it affects the way we live our lives. Now, I see a similar thing there. Sparda is just kind of like a historical lore figure that has that kind of legacy and impact that's monumentous. And I kind of wish writers could write that with the air of mystery in that. Well, actually, no, that's all I can really say about it without getting to the takeaway. As for the takeaways, I mainly see the points of leave some aspect of lore up to the imagination. Like, do give details and context of stuff, like why stuff happened or stuff that happened in the past. But leave some mystery to, like, don't detail it down to the very last iota of information. Like, leave some up for the audience or the gamer to just make up in their own mind. Or for you to come back and add on to later. Because you could just add on, like lore can also be used to make further games down the line, like prequels. But yeah, there's that. Provide scarce information in the lore. I mean, that can also, I mean, yeah, make it scarce. Like, just give like bits of information, not a whole lot. So maybe you can say, okay, this bad guy had this happen to him and this happened to him, or in the past there were these certain events that were horrible that later have influenced stuff in the present. And lastly, let figures of lore have influence on events in the story, even if they are no longer alive or present. Like, Sparda is never present in the games, but his impact and influence in the story is felt. At least at least in Devil May Cry 1 and 3. You very much feel like, and 4 to some extent, but I'd still say that's debatable. But yeah, those are the main points. Is like just the idea of a lore figure should not be like too influential. Like, do have let him have influence, but be scarce, and maybe gradually reveal more and more as time goes on. But not a whole lot. Still leave some to the imagination, but give just a little bit, a little smidget is all I'm saying. And that's the end of the video. This one, I really did not know where I was going. It was just an idea I had, and I wanted to do one because I don't really get to talk about lore that much. Anyway, have a nice day, and remember the game was rigged from the start.